Join us for a heartwarming tale of Isis Matthews, a young marketing executive whose panic attack at work leads her to seek solace in the mountains, where she meets Bruno Reed, a former businessman turned beekeeper. Their unexpected connection challenges both their worlds and priorities, showing how sometimes getting lost is the only way to find what truly matters. Before we begin this story, comment below where you're watching from. The office building's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Isis Matthews stared at her computer screen. At 25, she was the youngest marketing executive at Parker & Associates, but right now that achievement felt meaningless. Her heart raced as she tried to focus on the presentation she needed to finish by 3 p.m. "Isis, do you have those numbers? Ready for the client meeting?" her boss Margaret asked, popping her head into the cubicle. Isis nodded quickly, forcing a smile. "Almost done. I'll email them to you in 5 minutes." As Margaret walked away, Isis felt the familiar tightness in her chest. The room seemed to shrink around her. Her fingers trembled as she tried to type, but the keyboard looked blurry. The air felt thick, impossible to breathe. "Not now," she whispered to herself. "Please, not now." She tried the breathing exercises her therapist had taught her. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. But the panic was already taking over. The office sounds amplified, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, voices talking, all merging into overwhelming noise. Her vision narrowed to a pinpoint. "Isis, are you okay?" A concerned co-worker approached her desk, but Isis couldn't answer. The room spun violently, and before she could stop herself, she slid from her chair onto the floor. When she opened her eyes, she was lying on the couch in the break room. The company's HR director and her boss were looking down at her with concerned expressions. "The paramedics are on their way," Margaret said. "Just stay calm." "No, please," Isis managed, her voice weak with embarrassment. "I don't need an ambulance, I just had a panic attack." But the damage was done. By the next morning, the entire office knew what had happened. Whispers followed her as she walked to her desk. "Poor thing. The pressure got to her," she overheard someone say. Another voice replied, "Always on her phone, these young people don't know how to handle real work." That afternoon, she sat in Dr. Peterson's office, tears streaming down her face. "I've never been so humiliated," Isis said, accepting the tissue her therapist offered. "I worked so hard to be taken seriously, and now I'm just the girl who fainted during a meeting." Dr. Peterson listened patiently before leaning forward in her chair. "Isis, your body is sending you urgent messages. These panic attacks aren't random, they're warning signals." "But I'm doing everything right," Isis protested. "I exercise, I try to sleep enough, I even downloaded that meditation app you recommended." While constantly checking work emails and scrolling through social media, Dr. Peterson added gently. "When was the last time you were truly disconnected? Not just from work, but from everything?" Isis stared blankly. "I don't understand." "I think you need a complete reset," Dr. Peterson said. "A few weeks away from phones, computers, and the constant pressure of city life." Isis laughed nervously. "Like a digital detox retreat? Those are trending on Instagram right now." "No, not a trendy retreat. Somewhere real, somewhere quiet, where you can hear yourself think again." A week later, Isis found herself driving a rental car down a narrow country road, following directions to a small inn near Oakwood Valley. Her boss had reluctantly approved a 3-week leave of absence, and her parents, though worried, supported the decision. "You're going where?" her best friend Maya had asked when Isis told her about the trip. "There's probably not even decent Wi-Fi there." "That's kind of the point," Isis had replied, though the thought terrified her too. The Pine Ridge Inn was smaller than it had appeared in the few photos she'd found online. An older woman named Martha greeted her at the reception desk. "Welcome to Pine Ridge, honey. You must be Isis," she said warmly. "Not many city folks come this time of year. Most wait for the fall colors." "I'm not really here as a tourist," Isis explained awkwardly. "My doctor suggested I spend some time somewhere quiet." Martha nodded knowingly. "Well, you've come to the right place for quiet. Your room has a lovely view of the forest. No TV, I'm afraid, but the sunsets make up for it." Isis's room was simple but clean, with a handmade quilt on the bed and curtains that looked like they'd been hung decades ago. She unpacked her suitcase, placing her laptop on the small desk. by the window, though Dr. Peterson had made her promise to use it only for emergencies. That night, she lay awake listening to unfamiliar sounds, crickets chirping, an occasional owl, the creaking of the old building. So different from the car horns and sirens of the city. It should have been peaceful, but instead she felt strangely uncomfortable in the silence. The next morning, after a breakfast of homemade pancakes and fresh berries, Martha suggested a nearby hiking trail. "The wildflower path is perfect for beginners," Martha said, drawing a simple map on a napkin. "Just follow the marked trail. It loops back to the main road about 3 miles from here, but you can turn around any time. Should take you a couple of hours at most." Isis had never been much of a hiker, but the idea of doing something, anything, was better than sitting in her room fighting the urge to check her work emails. She changed into jeans and sneakers, filled a water bottle, and tucked Martha's makeshift map into her pocket. As an afterthought, she grabbed her phone, though Martha had warned her reception was spotty at best in the woods. The beginning of the trail was easy enough to follow, with wooden markers every 100 yards or so. The forest smelled of pine and earth, and sunlight filtered through the trees in golden patches. Isis walked slowly, trying to focus on the nature around her instead of the mental to-do list that constantly ran through her head. After about an hour, she stopped to drink some water and check her phone. No service, as expected. She took a few photos of wildflowers, then continued walking. But as the afternoon wore on, Isis realized something was wrong. The trail markers had become less frequent and the path less defined. She checked Martha's map, but it was just a simple drawing with few details. She should have reached the turning point by now. "Stay calm," she told herself. "Just backtrack." But which way had she come from? The forest looked the same in every direction. Panic began to rise in her chest, the familiar tightness, the shortness of breath. She tried calling for help, but her voice seemed to be absorbed by the dense trees. Her phone still showed no service. The sun was lower now, casting longer shadows through the forest. A rustling sound from nearby bushes made her jump. "Hello," she called, her voice shaking. "Is someone there?" More rustling, closer this time. Probably just a squirrel or a rabbit, she told herself. But as the daylight faded, her imagination filled the forest with threats. She began walking faster, no longer caring which direction, just wanting to find a road, a house, anything. Her foot caught on an exposed root, and she stumbled forward, scraping her hands and arms on the rough ground. That's when she heard it. A heavier movement, not just leaves rustling, but branches breaking. Something big was moving through the trees toward her. The last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains, leaving her in the blue-gray light of dusk. The forest sounds changed, becoming unfamiliar and threatening. Isis scrambled to her feet, ignoring the sting of the scratches on her arms. She backed away from the sound, then turned to run, but her foot slipped on loose stones, twisting painfully as she fell again. This time she couldn't hold back. A scream tore from her throat, equal parts pain and fear, and then through the trees came the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats. A large shape emerged from the shadows, a horse with a rider. The horse stopped a few yards away. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion and approached slowly, hands visible at his sides. In the fading light, Isis could make out broad shoulders, a strong jaw with a hint of stubble, and eyes that studied her carefully. "Are you hurt?" His voice was deep and calm, with no trace of the panic she felt. Isis tried to answer, but a sob escaped instead. She was trembling partly from the cooling evening air, partly from the leftover adrenaline. He knelt beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "You're on private property, but that doesn't matter right now. My name is Bruno Reed. This is my land." "I'm lost," Isis managed to say, her voice small. "I was hiking and the trail just disappeared." Bruno nodded. "The wildflower path. It's poorly maintained. The county was supposed to update the markers last spring." He looked at her scratched arms and the way she cradled her ankle. His expression was unreadable in the growing darkness, but his voice remained gentle. "You're safe now. The forest scares people who don't know it, but it respects those who listen." Something in his words, in the steady way he spoke them, made Isis's breathing slow down. The crushing pressure in her chest began to ease. "Can you stand?" he asked. Isis tried to put weight on her injured ankle, but winced at the pain. Without another word, Bruno whistled softly and the horse stepped closer. "This is Thunder," he said. "He's gentle. I'm going to help you up, okay?" Before Isis could protest, he lifted her carefully and placed her on the horse's back. Then he took the reins and began leading them through the trees. "My cabin is about half a mile from here," he explained. "I can clean up those cuts and look at your ankle. Then I'll drive you back to wherever you're staying." "The Pine Ridge Inn," Isis said, clinging nervously to the saddle. Bruno glanced back at her. "Martha's place. She should have warned you about hiking alone so late in the day." "She did give me a map," Isis admitted. I think I wandered off the trail without realizing it." "It happens," he said simply, without judgment. They emerged from the trees into a clearing where a log cabin stood, warm light spilling from its windows. A large barn was visible to one side, and beyond that, fields stretched into the darkness. Bruno helped her down from the horse and supported her as she limped to the porch. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly spacious, with a stone fireplace, comfortable-looking furniture, and bookshelves lining one wall. It was rustic but clean, smelling of wood smoke and something herbal. "Sit," he directed, guiding her to a couch. He disappeared into another room and returned with a first aid kit and a bowl of water. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to her scratched arms. Isis nodded, suddenly feeling awkward and vulnerable. Who was this man who lived alone in the woods? Why was he being so kind to a stranger? As if reading her thoughts, Bruno spoke as he gently cleaned her scratches. "I know this might seem strange to you, a man living alone out here helping a woman he just found in the woods. But everyone knows everyone around here. You can call Martha if you want. Tell her where you are." "I would, but my phone doesn't have service," Isis said. "You can use my landline," he offered, nodding toward an actual telephone on the wall. "Reception is terrible out here. That's why I never bothered with a cell phone." Isis looked at him in disbelief. "You don't have a cell phone at all?" The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Hard to believe, I know. Somehow I managed to survive." There was no mockery in his tone, just a hint of amusement. After cleaning her cuts, Bruno examined her ankle. "It's not broken," he concluded. "Just a mild sprain. Ice it tonight and keep it elevated." He moved to a kitchen area and returned with a steaming mug. "This will help with the pain. It's an herbal tea my grandmother taught me to make." Isis sniffed it cautiously. "What's in it?" "Chamomile, lavender, willow bark." "Nothing dangerous," he assured her. "I grow most of it myself." She took a small sip. It was bitter but not unpleasant, with a hint of honey. While she drank the tea, Bruno called the inn. She could hear Martha's relieved voice on the other end of the line. "She's fine, Martha," Bruno said. "Just a twisted ankle and a few scratches. Guess I'll drive her back once she's rested a bit." After hanging up, he stoked the fire and sat in a chair across from her. For the first time, Isis really looked at him. He was probably around 30, with dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. His face was tanned from spending time outdoors, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. "Thank you," she said, feeling like the words were inadequate. "If you hadn't found me—" "The forest isn't as dangerous as city people think," he said. "But it's good I found you when I did. It gets cold at night." Isis tried to make light of the situation. "Well, it's not exactly how I planned to spend my first day of vacation. Getting lost, falling down, being rescued like some helpless damsel in distress." She forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow even to her own ears. Bruno studied her for a moment. "Is that how you see yourself? Helpless?" "I feel pretty ridiculous right now," she admitted. "I'm supposed to be this successful career woman, but I can't even follow a simple hiking trail without having a meltdown. Weakness is continuing without feeling," he said quietly. "What you did was stop. That's strength." His words caught her off guard. They weren't what she expected from this stranger, who looked like he should be more comfortable talking to horses than people. "You don't know me," she said. "No," he agreed, "but I know what it looks like when someone is running from something, even if they end up lost in my woods." Isis looked away, uncomfortable with how easily he seemed to see through her. The tea, was making her feel warm and oddly calm, the pain in her ankle fading to a dull throb. "I should get you back to the inn," Bruno said, standing up. "Can you walk to the truck, or should I carry you?" "I can walk," she said quickly, not wanting to appear more helpless than she already did. He helped her to an old pickup truck parked beside the cabin. The drive to the inn took only about 15 minutes on winding back roads. They rode in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. When they arrived at the Pine Ridge Inn, Martha was waiting on the porch, concern etched on her face. "I was about to call the ranger station," she said, as Bruno helped Isis from the truck. "Bruno Reed, you should have called me sooner." "Sorry, Martha, I wanted to make sure she was okay first," he replied. Martha turned to Isis. "And you, young lady? Didn't I tell you to stay on the marked trail?" "It's not her fault," Bruno said. "Those markers are so faded even I have trouble seeing them sometimes." Martha sighed. "Well, what matters is, you're safe." Thank goodness Bruno was out riding thunder tonight. Bruno carried Isis's backpack to the inn's door. "Ice that ankle," he reminded her, "and maybe stay on the main road for walks the next few days." "Thank you again," Isis said, suddenly reluctant to see him go. "For everything." He nodded once, his eyes lingering on hers for a moment. Then he turned and walked back to his truck without another word. As Martha helped her inside, Isis found herself looking back over her shoulder, watching until the truck's taillights disappeared down the dark country road. "That man," Martha said, shaking her head with a fond smile, "lives like a hermit most of the time, but he's got the kindest heart. Now let's get some ice for that ankle, and I'll bring up some dinner on a tray." Later that night, as Isis lay in bed with her ankle propped on a pillow, she realized something strange. For the first time in months, the tightness in her chest was gone. She'd been lost, injured, and terrified in the woods, yet now she felt calmer than she had in a very long time. Her mind kept returning to Bruno's words. "Weakness is continuing without feeling. What you did was stop, that's strength." No one had ever suggested that her panic attacks might be anything but a flaw to overcome. The thought that they could actually be a kind of strength was revolutionary. She drifted off to sleep, thinking of a quiet voice and steady hands, wondering if she would see the mysterious cabin owner again before her vacation ended. The morning sun streamed through the curtains as Isis woke up at the Pine Ridge Inn. Her ankle felt better, though still tender when she put weight on it. Martha had brought her breakfast on a tray, fresh eggs, toast, and a pot of coffee that smelled heavenly. "How are you feeling today, dear?" Martha asked, checking on her. "Much better," Isis replied, surprised to realize it was true. Despite her misadventure in the forest, she had slept more soundly than she had in months. "Good," Martha said. "Dr. Wilson is stopping by this afternoon to look at that ankle. He's our local doctor, takes care of everyone within 20 miles. "That's not necessary," Isis protested. "It's just a sprain." Martha waved away her objection. "Bruno called this morning to check on you. He insisted on having Sam, that's Dr. Wilson, take a look. Don't worry, we won't bill your insurance. Sam does house calls for Pi." "Bruno called?" Isis asked, trying to sound casual. Martha's eyes twinkled. "He did. Asked how you were doing. Not like Bruno to take such an interest in a stranger." Isis felt her cheeks grow warm. He was just being kind. "Maybe," Martha said with a knowing smile. "He also dropped this off." She placed a small jar on the bedside table. "Said it's a salve for your scratches. His grandmother's recipe." Isis picked up the jar. The label simply read, "Healing Salve," in neat handwriting. His grandmother was half Cherokee, Martha explained. Knew all about medicinal plants. Taught Bruno everything before she passed. After Martha left, Isis opened the jar and smelled the salve, earthy and herbal. She applied it to her scratches, surprised at how quickly it seemed to soothe the stinging. Dr. Wilson visited later that day, a jovial man in his 60s who examined her ankle with gentle efficiency. "Just a mild sprain," he confirmed. "Stay off it today. Use the crutches Martha will lend you if you need to move around. And by tomorrow, you should be able to walk with minimal discomfort." Before leaving, he added, "Bruno's salve will help with those scratches. That man knows his herbs better than most pharmacists know their medications." That evening, Isis sat on the inn's front porch, her ankle propped on a footstool, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The urge to check her phone was still there, but less insistent than before. Besides, with no reception, what was the point? She was startled from her thoughts by the sound of an approaching vehicle. Bruno's pickup truck pulled into the driveway. He stepped out carrying a small basket. "Evening," he said, climbing the porch steps. "Martha said you were out here." "Hi," Isis replied, suddenly feeling shy. In daylight, she could see him more clearly. His dark hair had hints of auburn in the sunset light, and his eyes were a deep green. He wore a simple flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms. "I brought you these," he said, setting the basket beside her. Inside were fresh strawberries, still warm from the sun. "Thought you might be getting tired of inn food." "Thank you," she said, touched by the gesture. "That's very thoughtful." Bruno sat in the rocking chair next to her, seeming perfectly comfortable with silence. Finally, Isis spoke. "Your salve is working wonders on my scratches," he nodded. "Good. How's the ankle?" "Better. Dr. Wilson says I should be walking normally by tomorrow. Sam's a good doctor, old school but knows what he's doing." Another silence fell, but Isis felt compelled to fill it. "I want to thank you properly for rescuing me yesterday. Maybe I could buy you dinner at the inn. Martha says they serve meals to non-guests too." Bruno seemed to consider this. "Thank you, but I don't eat out much." Isis tried to hide her disappointment. "Oh, of course, I understand." He must have noticed her reaction because he added, "But if you'd like to see the farm in daylight, you're welcome to visit tomorrow. I could show you around, maybe pack a lunch." Her face brightened. "I'd like that if you're sure it's not an imposition." "It's not," he said simply. They agreed he would pick her up the next day at 10. Before leaving, he pointed to her phone, which sat unused on the small table beside her. "You haven't been checking that every 5 minutes," he observed. "Most city people can't stand being disconnected." Isis smiled. "No reception, remember? Though honestly, it's been nice, quieter." Something like approval flickered in his eyes. "Sleep well, Isis." As he drove away, Martha emerged from inside, a knowing look on her face. Well, 2 visits in 2 days. I haven't seen Bruno Reed take such an interest in anyone since he moved back here 5 years ago." "I barely know each other," Isis said. "Sometimes that doesn't matter," Martha replied cryptically. The next morning, Isis dressed with more care than she wanted to admit, choosing a simple blue sundress and sandals that wouldn't put too much pressure on her healing ankle. Her dark hair, usually straightened for the office, fell in its natural waves around her shoulders. Bruno arrived exactly at 10. He helped her into the truck with a gentle hand on her elbow, careful of her ankle. "You looks nice," he said, the compliment sounding genuine if a bit awkward, as if he wasn't used to giving them. "Thank you," she replied, surprised at how much the simple words pleased her. The drive to his farm took them deeper into the countryside. In daylight, Isis could see how beautiful the area was. Rolling hills, meadows dotted with wildflowers, and forests that seemed to go on forever. "How big is your property?" she asked. "About 300 acres, Bruno answered. "Most of it is forest. I keep 50 acres clear for the horses, bees, and garden." "That's a lot of land for one person to manage," he shrugged. "I have help when I need it. Local kids work for me in the summer, and there's a family that leases part of the pasture for their goats." They turned down a long driveway lined with oak trees. The cabin she remembered from the night before came into view, looking even more charming in daylight. Beyond it stretched fenced pastures where several horses grazed. A large garden grew near a greenhouse, and at the edge of the clearing stood rows of white boxes. "Beehives?" Isis asked. Bruno nodded. 20 colonies. I sell the honey at farmers' markets." He parked near the cabin and came around to help her out. Her ankle felt much better, but she appreciated his steadying hand nonetheless. "Let me show you around," he said. For the next hour, Bruno led her through his small but thriving farm. He showed her the garden where he grew vegetables and herbs, explaining which plants had medicinal properties. The greenhouse held seedlings and more delicate herbs that couldn't survive the cooler mountain. "Tights, this is amazing," Isis said, genuinely impressed. "You're completely self-sufficient." "Not completely," he replied. "I still need toilet paper and coffee, but I try to live simply." Next, they visited the horses. Bruno introduced each one by name, explaining their personalities as if they were old friends. Thunder, the black gelding, who had been part of her rescue, came right up to the fence when he saw them. "He remembers you," Bruno said as the horse gently nudged Isis's hand. "I'm pretty memorable," she joked. "Not every day he carries a hysterical woman out of the woods." "You weren't hysterical," Bruno corrected her. "You were hurt and scared. There's a difference." His defense of her touched something inside Isis. She was used to downplaying her feelings, making light of her pain so others wouldn't be uncomfortable, but Bruno seemed to see right through that habit. Last they walked to the beehives. Bruno moved with calm confidence among the buzzing insects. "Aren't you afraid of getting stung?" Isis asked, keeping a safe distance. "Bees only sting when they're threatened," he explained. "If you move slowly and respect their space, they leave you alone." He carefully lifted a frame from one of the hives, showing her the honeycomb inside. "Look how they work together. Each one has a purpose, a job that matters to the whole hive." The way he spoke about the bees with such reverence and understanding fascinated Isis. This man was so different from anyone she knew in the city. By noon, they had worked up an appetite. Bruno led her to a clearing near a small stream, where he spread a blanket on the grass. From a backpack, he produced sandwiches, fresh fruit, and mason jars of iced tea. "This is wonderful," Isis said, taking a bite of her sandwich. The homemade bread and fresh vegetables were better than any restaurant meal she'd had recently. "It's nothing fancy," Bruno said. "That's what makes it perfect," she replied honestly. As they ate, Isis found herself wanting to know more about this quiet man who seemed so content with his solitary life. "Have you always lived here?" she asked. Bruno was silent for a moment before answering. "I grew up about 20 miles from here in Riverdale. My family owned a chain of hotels. I was supposed to take over the business eventually, but it never felt right. So you became a farmer instead." Isis couldn't hide her surprise. "Not right away," he explained. "I went to college, got a business degree to please my parents, worked in the hotel industry for 5 years, hated every minute of it." "What changed?" "My grandmother got sick. She lived out here alone after my grandfather died. I came to take care of her during her last year. Being here with her, learning about the land, the plants, the animals, it felt like coming home." "And your parents, were they okay with you leaving the family business?" A shadow crossed his face. "Not at first. We didn't speak for almost 2 years. They've come around some now, though they still think I'm wasting my potential." Isis thought about her own parents' expectations, their pride in her corporate success, their constant questions about promotions and career advancement. Would they understand if she told them how empty it sometimes felt? "What about you?" Bruno asked, turning the conversation away from himself. "What made you come out here alone?" Isis hesitated. She wasn't used to talking about her panic attacks. In the city, mental health struggles were often seen as weaknesses, especially in her competitive industry. "I had a breakdown at work," she admitted finally. "It wasn't the first time, but it was the worst. My therapist suggested a complete break from everything. Work, social media, city life. And is it helping?" "I've only been here 3 days," she reminded him with a smile. "But yes, I think it is. Even getting lost in the woods somehow helped. It put things in perspective." Bruno nodded thoughtfully. "Nature has a way of doing that, showing us what really matters." After lunch, they walked along the stream. Bruno pointed out plants and birds, naming each one with easy familiarity. Isis realized she had spent her entire adult life in cities, surrounded by concrete and glass, hardly noticing the natural world at all. "What's that one?" she asked, pointing to a purple wildflower. "Echinacea," he replied. "Good for boosting the immune system. My grandmother used to make a tea from the leaves when anyone had a cold." "You learned so much from her," Isis observed. "She was the wisest person I've ever known," Bruno said, his voice soft with memory. "She used to say we've forgotten how to listen. To the land, to our bodies, to each other." Those words struck Isis deeply. Wasn't that exactly what had happened to her? She had ignored all the warning signs her body had been giving her until it finally shut down in that meeting. As the afternoon wore on, they returned to the cabin. Bruno showed her his workshop where he made furniture and carved wooden bowls to sell at craft fairs. "You're a man of many talents," Isis said, running her fingers over the smooth surface of a cherry wood bowl. Just things I enjoy doing, he replied. There's a satisfaction in making something with your hands that I never found sitting in an office. Inside the cabin, Isis noticed details she had missed the night before. Bookshelves filled with classics, and practical guides to farming and woodworking. A piano in one corner. Family photos on the mantel. You play? She asked, nodding toward the piano. A little. My mother insisted on lessons when I was young. Would you play something for me? Bruno seemed hesitant, but sat at the piano and began a simple, haunting melody that filled the cabin. His strong hands moved over the keys with surprising grace. Isis watched, mesmerized by this new facet of him. When he finished, their eyes met and something passed between them, a recognition perhaps of kindred spirits, despite their different worlds. It's getting late, Bruno said, breaking the moment. I should take you back to the inn. On the drive back, Isis found herself wishing the day wouldn't end. There was something about Bruno's quiet presence that calmed the restlessness inside her. For once, she hadn't thought about work emails or social media updates or the constant pressure to achieve more. Thank you for today, she said as they pulled up to the inn. It was peaceful. Bruno nodded. You're welcome anytime, Isis. The farm could use more visitors. She sensed there was more he wanted to say, but he simply walked her to the inn's door. Will I see you again? She found herself asking. If you want to, he replied, his green eyes searching hers. I do, she said, simply. That night, as Isis lay in bed, she replayed the day in her mind. Bruno was unlike any man she had dated in the city. Those ambitious, fast-talking men who were always checking their phones during dinner, always rushing to the next meeting or networking event. She thought about how his life was guided by the rhythms of nature rather than the ping of notifications, how he seemed to truly see her, not as a successful marketing executive or a potential business connection, but simply as a person. It scared her, how quickly she was drawn to him. In a little over a week, she would be returning to the city, to her job, to her real life. Whatever this was with Bruno couldn't possibly last beyond her vacation. Yet as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't help but look forward to seeing him again. The next few days fell into a pleasant pattern. Bruno would pick her up in the mornings, and they would spend the day together at his farm. Isis learned to collect eggs from the henhouse, helped plant seedlings in the garden, and even tried her hand at simple woodworking under Bruno's patient guidance. In the evenings, they would sit on his porch watching the sunset, talking about everything and nothing. Bruno told her stories about growing up in a family that valued success above happiness. Isis shared her struggles with anxiety and the constant pressure she put on herself to succeed. I've been having panic attacks since college, she admitted, one evening as they watched fireflies appear in the gathering dusk. But they got worse after my promotion last year. More responsibility, more stress. Have you ever thought about doing something else? Bruno asked. Isis shook her head. I've worked so hard to get where I am. Walking away now would feel like failure, even if it's making you miserable. His directness was both refreshing and unsettling. No one in her life had ever questioned her career choices so bluntly. It's not all miserable, she defended. I like the creative aspects of my job, coming up with marketing campaigns, seeing them succeed. And the rest of it, she sighed. The politics, the constant connectivity, the pressure. No, I don't enjoy that part. Bruno was quiet for a moment. My father used to say I was throwing my life away when I decided to stay here. Maybe I was, in his eyes. But I've never regretted choosing a life that brings me peace over one that would have brought me status. His words stayed with Isis that night as she returned to the inn. Was she truly happy with her life in the city? Or had she just convinced herself that the stress and anxiety were necessary prices to pay for success? On her 5th day at Pine Ridge, Bruno took her riding. He chose a gentle mare named Daisy for her, showing her how to mount and hold the reins. I've never been on a horse before, Isis admitted nervously. Daisy will take care of you, Bruno assured her. She's been carrying beginners for years. They rode slowly along forest trails, Bruno pointing out landmarks, so she wouldn't get lost again if she ever ventured out alone. Thunder walked steadily beside Daisy, as if the bigger horse was looking out for his less experienced companions. They stopped at a clearing overlooking a valley. In the distance, mountains rose in misty blue layers. "It's beautiful," Isis breathed, taking in the vista. "This is my favorite spot on the property," Bruno said. "My grandmother and I used to picnic here when I was a boy. Later, when I came to care for her, we would drive up in her old Jeep when she was having good days." "You really loved her," Isis observed. "She saved me," he said simply. "I was drowning in a life that wasn't mine. She showed me another way to live." As they sat together on a fallen log, enjoying the view and the gentle breeze, Bruno's hand found hers. His touch was warm, calloused from work but gentle. Isis felt her heart quicken, but not with the familiar panic, with something else entirely. When he leaned over and kissed her, it felt as natural as breathing. His lips were soft, the kiss unhurried. When they broke apart, Isis saw something vulnerable in Bruno's usually composed expression. "I didn't plan for this to happen," he said quietly. "Neither did I," she admitted. They rode back to the cabin, in comfortable silence, both aware that something had shifted between them. That evening, Bruno cooked dinner for her. A simple meal of trout he had caught himself, vegetables from his garden, and fresh bread. As they ate by candlelight, Isis felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in years. But a nagging thought kept intruding. In a week she would be going back to the city, back to her real life. "What are you thinking?" Bruno asked, noticing her distraction. "That this feels like a dream," she said honestly, "and I'm afraid of waking up." His expression grew serious. "This isn't a dream, Isis. What's happening between us is real." "But I have to go back next Friday," she reminded him. "My leave from work is only 3 weeks." Bruno was quiet for a long moment. "I know. I've been trying not to think about that." "What? Is this Bruno?" Isis asked, needing to name the growing feeling between them. "Are we just having a vacation romance?" "Is that what you want it to be?" he countered. She looked into his green eyes, seeing the sincerity there. "No," she admitted. "But I don't see how it can be anything else. My life is in the city. Yours is here." "People make long-distance relationships work all the time," he suggested. But Isis shook her head. "For how long? Eventually someone has to compromise. I can't ask you to leave this place. It's your home, your life's work. And I don't know if I could give up everything I've worked for to move to the middle of nowhere." The words sounded harsh as soon as they left her mouth. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "You meant it," Bruno interrupted, his voice steady but with an edge of hurt. "And you're right. This is the middle of nowhere to someone used to city life. I shouldn't have expected you to see it differently." "That's not fair," Isis protested. "I do see how special this place is, how meaningful your work is. But my career matters to me too." "Even if it's making you sick?" Bruno challenged. "Those panic attacks aren't random, Isis. They're your body telling you something's wrong." His words hit too close to home. "You don't understand the pressure," she said defensively. "In my world, if you step back, you get left behind. There are 100 people ready to take my place if I falter. And in my world, there's time to breathe," he replied. "Time to listen to what your body and heart are telling you." They were at an impasse, both hurt by the sudden realization of the gulf between their lives. Bruno drove her back to the inn earlier than usual, the silence in the truck heavy with unspoken words. At the inn's door, he hesitated. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I had no right to judge your choices, and I had no right to dismiss your life." "As the middle of nowhere," Isis replied. "This place is beautiful, Bruno. What you've built here is amazing." They stood awkwardly, neither sure how to bridge the sudden distance between them. "Will I see you tomorrow?" Isis asked, not ready to let go of whatever was growing between them, despite the complications. Bruno nodded. "I'll pick you up at 10, as—" She watched him drive away. Isis felt tears prick her eyes. She had come here seeking peace, a break from stress and anxiety. Instead, she had found Bruno, and now faced a different kind of heartache entirely. Isis barely slept that night, mind churning with thoughts of Bruno and the impossible choice that loomed before her. How could she have developed such strong feelings for someone in less than a week? It seemed ridiculous, like something from a movie, not real life. Her phone sat on the nightstand, still useless without reception. She picked it up anyway, scrolling, through old emails and text messages, reminders of the life waiting for her back in the city. Meeting schedules, project deadlines, messages from colleagues asking when she'd return. One text from her boss stood out. "Hope you're getting the rest you need. The Richardson account is waiting for your magic touch when you get back. No pressure, but they've increased their budget by 30%. No pressure. Right." By morning, Isis felt exhausted but resolved. She needed to be practical. Whatever she felt for. Bruno, however real it seemed, they lived in different worlds. A long-distance relationship would eventually fail, leaving them both hurt. Better to enjoy the time they had left and part as friends. But when Bruno arrived at 10, his green eyes, searching hers with concern, her practical resolution wavered. "You look tired," he said simply. "I didn't sleep well," she admitted. He hesitated before speaking again. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night. I had no right to question your life choices or make you feel bad about wanting to return to your career." "You were just being honest," Isis replied. "Still, I'm sorry." She touched his arm gently. "I'm sorry too. For what it's worth, being here with you has made me happier than I've been in a long time." A smile softened his features. "Then let's enjoy the time we have left. No more talk about next Friday until next Friday." "Deal," Isis agreed, relief washing through her. Bruno had a surprise planned for that day, a trip to a local farmer's market where he sold his honey and woodwork. "I want to show you more of the community," he explained, as they drove into a small town about 20 minutes from Pine Ridge Inn. The market was set up in the town square, colorful canopies covering tables filled with local produce, crafts, and homemade goods. Bruno's booth was near the center, a simple wooden table displaying jars of golden honey and his carved wooden bowls and spoons. "Bruno!" A round-faced woman from the next booth waved enthusiastically. "Who's your friend?" "Marge, this is Isis," Bruno introduced. "Isis, Marge makes the best jams and preserves in the county." "Pleasure to meet you, honey," Marge said with a warm smile. "We don't often see Bruno with company." Throughout the morning, Isis met more of the local vendors, all of whom seemed delighted to see Bruno with someone. It was clear he was respected in the community, though many teased him about his solitary habits. 5 years he's been coming. "To this market," an older man selling vegetables told Isis, "and you're the first person he's ever brought along." Isis helped Bruno sell his honey, surprised at how easily she fell into conversation with the customers. There was none of the pressure she felt at work presentations, just simple human connection. During a quiet moment, Bruno asked, "Would you mind watching the booth for a few minutes? I need to speak with Tom about some beekeeping supplies." "Sure," Isis agreed, feeling oddly pleased at being trusted with his business. While Bruno was gone, a well-dressed couple stopped at the booth. The woman picked up one of the wooden bowls, examining it with appreciation. "This craftsmanship is exquisite," she commented. "Are you the artist?" "Oh no," Isis laughed. "Bruno makes them. I'm just helping out today." "My wife has an art gallery in Asheville," the man explained. "We're always looking for high-quality artisanal pieces like these." The woman handed Isis a business card. "Please have Bruno contact me. We'd love to feature his work. The honey, too. Our organic section is quite popular." When Bruno returned, Isis excitedly told him about the gallery owners, but instead of sharing her enthusiasm, he seemed hesitant. "Caroline Rhodes," he read from the card. "I've heard of her gallery, very upscale." "Isn't that great?" Isis asked. "Your work deserves to be seen by more people." Bruno pocketed the card without committing. "Maybe. The farmer's market keeps me busy enough." Isis didn't understand his reluctance. "Bruno, this could be a real opportunity. Your work is beautiful. Why not share it with a wider audience?" "It's not that simple," he said. "More business means more production, less time for the things that matter to me, the bees, the horses, the land." "But you could hire help," Isis suggested. "Expand gradually." Bruno's expression grew distant. "That's how it starts. Next thing you know, you're running a company instead of doing what you love." He shook his head. "I've seen what business success costs. I'm not willing to pay that price again." Isis wanted to argue further, but sensed this was touching on something deeper for Bruno. They finished the market day in relative quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. On the drive back, Bruno finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry if I seemed ungrateful. I know you were just trying to help. I just don't understand why you'd limit yourself," Isis said. "You have so much talent." Bruno was quiet for a moment before responding. "Before I moved here, I was the regional manager for my family's hotel chain. I had an office on the 30th floor, wore expensive suits, attended charity galas. By every conventional measure, I was successful." "What happened?" Isis asked. "I was in a relationship with someone who loved that life, the status, the money, the social connections. Rebecca was beautiful, ambitious, perfect for the role of executive's wife. We were engaged to be married." Isis felt a twinge of jealousy at the mention of this perfect woman from Bruno's past. "When my grandmother got sick and I came here to care for her, Rebecca was supportive at first. But as weeks turned into months, she started pressuring me to return to the city. She couldn't understand why I'd choose to stay in this backwater town caring for an old woman when I had such a promising career." His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "The more time I spent here, the more I realized how empty my life had been before. When I told Rebecca I was considering staying permanently, she gave me an ultimatum: my career or my grandmother. I made you choose." Isis was appalled. Bruno nodded. "I chose my grandmother, of course. Rebecca couldn't understand. She said I was throwing everything away, that I'd regret it when I was stuck in this nowhere place while she was living the life we'd planned." "That's terrible," Isis said softly. "The thing is," Bruno continued, "she wasn't wrong about everything. I did walk away from opportunities, from financial security, from a certain kind of future. What she couldn't see was that I gained something more valuable: peace, purpose, connection to something real." Isis thought about her own busy, stress-filled life. Did she have those things: peace, purpose, real connection? Or had she been chasing success at the expense of her well-being? "I'm not saying your life in the city is wrong," Bruno added, as if reading her thoughts. "Just that I've made my choice with open eyes. I know what I gave up and I know what I gained." "Thank you for telling me," Isis said, reaching over to touch his hand. When they arrived back at the farm, Bruno suggested a walk to clear the air. They followed a path through a meadow blooming with wildflowers, their earlier tension dissolving in the beauty of the afternoon. "Tell me about your life in the city," Bruno said. "Not the parts that stress you out, the parts you love." Isis thought for a moment. "I love the energy, the sense that anything is possible. I love walking through downtown at night with all the lights and people. I love my favorite coffee shop, where the barista knows my order without asking." Bruno listened attentively as she described the good parts of her life: her small but stylish apartment, her friends, the satisfaction of seeing a marketing campaign she created succeed. "It sounds like there's a lot you'd be giving up if you left," he observed. "Yes," she admitted, "but there's a lot I'd be gaining too." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Bruno's steps faltered, his eyes finding hers with sudden intensity. "Isis," he said, his voice low, "I don't want you to think I'm asking you to give up your life for me. We've known each other for a week." "I know," she said quickly, embarrassed by her implication. "I didn't mean—" But Bruno took her hands in his. "Let me finish. We've known each other for a week, but I've never felt this way about anyone, not even Rebecca. There's something between us that seems important." Isis's heart pounded. "I feel it too. But," he continued, "I've seen what happens when someone gives up everything for another person. It breeds resentment, regret. I don't want that for us." "What do you want?" she asked. "Time," he said simply. "Time to see if what we feel is real or just the magic of this place, this moment." Isis nodded, understanding his caution even as part of her wanted to throw caution to the winds. They continued their walk, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. By the time they returned to the cabin, the heavy mood had lifted. Bruno prepared dinner while Isis sat at the kitchen counter, enjoying the simple domesticity of the scene. "Can I help?" she offered. "You can slice the bread," he suggested, nodding, toward a fresh loaf on the cutting board. As they worked together in the kitchen, Isis felt a sense of rightness, of belonging. It was so different from her solitary meals in her apartment, often eaten in front of her laptop as she caught up on work. After dinner, they sat on the porch swing watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Bruno's arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against him. The night was cool, but his warmth beside her was all she needed. "I've never seen so many stars," Isis marveled, looking up at the vast canopy of lights. "Light pollution in the city blocks most of them," Bruno explained. "Out here we see the sky as it really is." There was a metaphor there, Isis thought. How much of real life, real beauty, real connection, was she missing in the constant artificial light and noise of the city? Bruno turned to her, his face serious in the dim porch light. "There's somewhere special I want to take you tomorrow night. A place my grandmother showed me." "What kind of place?" Isis asked. "A place to see the stars even better," he said with a small smile. "We'll have to hike a bit, but it's worth it. After my last hiking experience, I'm not sure that's a good idea," Isis teased. "I'll be with you every step," Bruno promised, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "No getting lost this time." His fingers lingered on her cheek, and Isis leaned into his touch. When they kissed this time, it was deeper, more certain. His arms encircled her, drawing her close, and Isis felt herself melting into him, all the doubts and complications momentarily forgotten. Later, as Bruno drove her back to the inn, Isis knew she was falling in love with him. The realization should have frightened her. It was too fast, too intense, too complicated. But instead, it filled her with a strange calm, as if some part of her had been waiting for this all along. "Tomorrow night," Bruno reminded her as they said goodnight. "Wear something warm. It gets cold on the mountain after sunset." The next day passed in a blur of anticipation. Isis spent the morning helping Martha with some light chores around the inn, grateful for the distraction. "You've been spending a lot of time with Bruno," Martha observed as they folded sheets together. "Yes," Isis admitted, unable to keep a smile from her face. Martha studied her for a moment. "He's a good man, best I know, but he's been hurt before." "He told me about Rebecca," Isis said. Martha nodded. "That woman nearly broke him. Came here once, you know, wearing high heels on a dirt road, complaining about the lack of cell service. Couldn't understand why Bruno would waste his potential, as she put it. I'm not like her," Isis said quietly. "No, honey, I don't think you are," Martha agreed. "But you do have a life waiting for you back in the city. Just be sure about what you want before you make any promises to that boy. His heart doesn't heal easy." Isis thought about Martha's warning all day. Was she being fair to Bruno? She was leaving in less than a week. Even if they tried to maintain a relationship, the challenges would be enormous. Bruno picked her up that evening as promised. He had packed a small backpack with water, snacks, and a blanket. They drove to the edge of his property, where a narrow trail led up the mountainside. "It's about a 30-minute hike," he explained as they started up the hay path. "Not too steep, but watch your footing." The trail wound through trees at first, then emerged onto more open ground as they climbed higher. Bruno kept a careful pace, making sure Isis could follow comfortably. He pointed out interesting plants and rock formations along the way, his knowledge of the mountain as thorough as his knowledge of his farm. Just as the sky was beginning to darken from blue to indigo, they reached their destination, a flat outcropping of rock that formed a natural platform overlooking the valley below. In the distance, the lights of small towns twinkled like earthbound stars. "This is beautiful," Isis breathed, taking in the panoramic view. Bruno spread the blanket on the smooth rock and invited her to sit. From his backpack, he produced a thermos of hot chocolate. "My grandmother and I used to come up here during meteor showers," he explained, pouring the steaming liquid into cups. "She taught me the constellations, the stories behind them." As darkness fell completely, the stars emerged in their full glory. Bruno pointed out Orion, the Big Dipper, Cassiopeia, drawing invisible lines between the stars as he recounted the ancient myths associated with each one. Isis leaned back, overwhelmed by the vastness above them. "Makes you feel small, doesn't it?" "In a good way," Bruno agreed. "Puts things in perspective." They lay side by side on the blanket, gazing upward, occasionally pointing out particularly bright stars or satellites moving across the sky. Bruno's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "I wish we could freeze this moment," Isis said softly. "We can't freeze it," Bruno replied, "but we can remember it. Carry it with us." He turned on his side to face her, his expression serious in the starlight. "Isis, I don't know what happens when you go back to the city. I don't know if what we've found here can survive the distance and the differences in our lives. But I do know that meeting you has changed something in me." Isis felt tears prick her eyes. "It's changed me too." "I'm not going to ask you to stay," he continued. "That wouldn't be fair to either of us. But I am going to ask you to be open to possibilities, to not just go back to your old life as if this never happened." "I couldn't if I tried," Isis admitted. Bruno leaned forward and kissed her, a kiss that held both promise and restraint. When they broke apart, he whispered, "I don't want to just be a vacation memory for you." "You could never be just that," she assured him. They stayed on the mountain for hours, talking, sharing stories, occasionally falling into comfortable silence. Bruno told her more about his grandmother, the wisdom she had shared with him, the courage she had shown in her final illness. She never complained, he said. Not once, even when the pain was bad. She said she'd had a good life, full of love and beauty. What more could anyone ask for? "She sounds remarkable," Isis said. "She would have liked you," Bruno replied. "She always said I needed someone who could challenge me, not just agree with everything I said." Isis laughed. "Well, I definitely don't agree with everything you say." "Exactly," Bruno smiled. "Like your insistence that I should sell my bowls in that fancy gallery." "You're still thinking about that?" Isis asked, surprised. "I am," he admitted. "You made some good points. Maybe I have been too cautious, too afraid of repeating past mistakes. There's a middle ground," Isis suggested. "You don't have to become a corporate CEO just because you expand your business a little." "Maybe," Bruno conceded, "but only if it doesn't take me away from what matters." "What matters to you, Bruno?" Isis asked, genuinely curious. He thought for a moment. "The land, the animals, creating things with my hands, living in harmony with nature instead of trying to control it." He looked at her. "And now, you." The simple declaration took her breath away. No one had ever spoken to her with such honesty, such directness. "I matter to you?" she asked softly. "More than I expected," he replied. "More than is probably wise after such a short time." Isis touched his face, feeling the slight roughness of his evening stubble. "You matter to me too, and it scares me, because I don't know how to make this work." "Neither do I," Bruno admitted. "But I know I want to try." The night air had grown quite cold, the temperature dropping as it often did in the mountains. Isis shivered despite her jacket. "We should head back," Bruno said, noticing her discomfort. They packed up their things and started down the trail, Bruno leading the way with a small flashlight. The descent was easier than the climb, but Isis was glad for Bruno's steadying hand on the steeper sections. When they reached the truck, Bruno turned to her suddenly. "Stay with me tonight," he said. Just to be together. I'm not ready to say goodnight." Isis hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'm not ready either." At the cabin, Bruno built a fire in the fireplace, while Isis called Martha to let her know she wouldn't be returning to the inn that night. Martha's knowing made Isis blush, but she didn't try to explain. Bruno lent her a soft flannel shirt to sleep in and showed her to the bathroom. It was simple but clean, with hand-milled soap that smelled of pine and herbs. When she emerged, Bruno had made up the couch with blankets and a pillow. "You take the bed," he insisted. "I'll sleep out here." "You don't have to," Isis began. "I want to do this right," Bruno interrupted gently. No rushing, no pressure. His old-fashioned gallantry touched her. In the city, men she dated often assumed physical intimacy by the third date. Bruno's respect, his patience was refreshing. But as she lay in his bed, surrounded by his scent, Isis found it hard to sleep. She was acutely aware of him just a room away, of the feelings building between them, of the limited time they had left. After tossing and turning for an hour, she got up and padded quietly to the living room. Bruno was still awake, staring into the dying embers of the fire. "Can't sleep?" he asked, looking up at her. Isis shook her head. too much on my mind. He made room for her on the couch, wrapping a blanket around them both as she sat beside him. She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "Tell me what you're thinking," he encouraged. "I'm thinking about going back," she admitted, "about what it will be like to return to meetings and deadlines and traffic jams after this. And I'm not sure I can do it," she said, voicing the fear that had been growing in her since she met him. "What if I go back and have another panic attack? What if I can't handle the pressure anymore?" Bruno was quiet for a moment. "Maybe that wouldn't be the worst thing." "What do you mean?" "Maybe it would be a sign that you need to make changes," he suggested. "Not necessarily moving to the mountains and raising bees." He smiled slightly. "But finding a way to live that doesn't make you sick." Isis considered this. "I've always defined myself by my career, my success. If I step back from that, who am I?" "You're Isis," Bruno said simply. "The woman who gets lost in the woods but finds her way out. The woman who asks thoughtful questions. The woman who sees beauty in simple things. The woman I'm falling in love with." The last words were spoken so softly she almost missed them, but they echoed in her heart, awakening both joy and fear. "Bruno," she whispered, turning to face him, "I'm falling in love with you too, and it terrifies me." He traced her cheek with gentle fingers. "Why?" "Because love means vulnerability. It means risking pain, and I've spent years building walls to protect myself from anything that could hurt me. Those same walls keep out joy," Bruno observed. "Trust me, I know. After Rebecca left, I built my own fortress. It was safe but lonely. And now?" Isis asked. "Now I'm taking a chance," he said, his green eyes serious in the firelight. "On you, on us, whatever that looks like." Isis kissed him then, pouring all her confused emotions into the connection. Bruno responded with equal fervor, his arms pulling her close as if he could keep her with him through sheer will. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Bruno rested his forehead against hers. "We should get some sleep." But neither of them moved. Instead, they stayed on the couch, talking softly as the fire died completely and the cabin grew dark. Eventually, Isis dozed off in Bruno's arms, more comfortable than she had been in her own bed for years. She woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee. Bruno was in the kitchen preparing breakfast. His hair was damp from a shower, his sleeves rolled up as he cracked eggs into a bowl. "Morning," he said with a smile when he noticed she was awake. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," she admitted, stretching. Bruno brought her a mug of coffee, prepared exactly as she liked it. The small gesture of remembrance touched her deeply. As they ate breakfast, Isis asked the question that had been circling in her mind. "What do we do now, Bruno? I leave in 4 days." He set down his fork, his expression serious. "I've been thinking about that. What if I came to visit you in the city, see your world, the way you've seen mine?" "You'd do that?" Isis was surprised. "I thought you hated cities." "I don't hate them," he corrected. "I just prefer it here, but I want to understand your life, what matters to you there." The thought of Bruno in her sleek modern apartment, walking the busy downtown streets, meeting her friends, it was hard to imagine but strangely appealing. "I'd like that," she said. "When?" "A few weeks after you go back," he suggested. "Give you time to settle in, catch up on work. Maybe I could come for a long weekend." "Yes," Isis agreed, already mentally rearranging her schedule to clear as much time as possible. "And I could come back here sometime, for another vacation." Bruno smiled, but there was a shadow in his eyes. They both knew the challenges of a long-distance relationship, the strain it would put on both of them. But they were choosing to try, to take a chance on the connection they'd found. The next 4 days passed in a bittersweet blur. Isis spent most of her time at Bruno's farm, soaking in every moment, every experience. They rode horses along forest trails, worked together in the garden, sat on the porch talking for hours as the sun set behind the mountains. At night, she returned to the inn, though it grew harder each time to say goodbye. Martha watched their growing attachment with kind but concerned eyes, offering Isis tea and sympathy when she seemed particularly thoughtful. Long-distance relationships are hard, Martha said one evening as they sat on the inn's porch. But not impossible. My sister and her husband did it for 2 years while he was in the military. How did they make it work? Isis asked. Communication, Martha replied simply. Not just regular talks, but honest ones, and visits as many as they could manage. But mostly, they never lost sight of why they were doing it, because what they had was worth the struggle. On her last full day, Bruno took her to a local festival in the town square. There was live music, folk dancing, and food stalls selling regional specialties. They wandered hand in hand, stopping to chat with Bruno's friends and neighbors, many of whom welcomed Isis warmly. Everyone here has been so kind, Isis remarked as they sat on a bench, sharing a slice of homemade apple pie. It's a real community, Bruno explained. People look out for each other here. When my grandmother was sick, neighbors took turns bringing meals, cutting the grass, even feeding the chickens so I could focus on her care. Isis thought about her apartment building in the city, where she barely knew her neighbors' names. There was community in the city too, she reminded herself, but it was different, based on shared interests or workplaces rather than proximity and need. As evening fell, lanterns were lit around the square, and more people arrived for the dancing. A local band played traditional mountain music, the fiddle and banjo creating a lively, infectious rhythm. Dance with me? Bruno asked, standing and offering his hand. I don't know the steps, Isis protested. Neither do I, really, he admitted with a grin. We'll figure it out together. They joined the circle of dancers, following along as best they could, laughing at their missteps. Bruno was surprisingly graceful for such a tall man, and Isis soon caught on to the basic pattern. Around them, couples and families of all ages moved to the music, a living, breathing community celebrating together. In that moment, surrounded by music and laughter, Bruno's hand warm in hers, Isis felt a sense of belonging she had rarely experienced before. These weren't her people. This wasn't her home, yet somehow it felt right. She could picture herself here, becoming part of this community, building a life with Bruno. But as the thought formed, reality intruded. Tomorrow she would be leaving. Her flight was booked, her boss expecting her back at work on Monday. The life she had built over years was waiting for her, with all its obligations and expectations. Bruno seemed to sense her sudden disquiet. What's wrong? He asked, leading her away from the dancers to a quieter spot. Just thinking about tomorrow, she admitted. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. Let's not think about tomorrow yet, we still have tonight. After the festival, they returned to Bruno's cabin. He had prepared the place specially, with candles lit throughout the living room, and a small wrapped package on the coffee table. What's this? Isis asked, picking up the gift. Something to remember me by, Bruno said. Open it. Inside was a wooden pendant on a leather cord. The wood was polished to a warm glow, carved in the shape of a bee. It's beautiful, Isis breathed, running her fingers over the smooth surface. I made it from cherry wood, Bruno explained. The same wood as the bowl you admired that first day in my workshop. He took the necklace and fastened it around her neck, the pendant resting just below her collarbone. Now you'll have a piece of this place with you no matter where you go. Isis touched the carving, her throat tight with emotion. I'll never take it off. They spent their last night together on the porch swing, wrapped in blankets against the cool mountain air, talking about everything and nothing. Plans for the future, memories of the past, hopes and fears they hadn't shared with anyone else. I'm going to miss this, Isis said, gesturing to the starry sky, the dark outline of the mountains against it. The peace here. You can find moments of peace anywhere, Bruno told her, even in the city. My grandmother used to say that peace isn't a place, it's a practice. What does that mean? Isis asked. It means taking time to breathe, to notice beauty, to be fully present, he explained. You can do that in a high-rise apartment just as well as on a mountain. It's harder maybe, with more distractions, but possible. Isis wondered if she could carry that lesson back with her, if she could maintain the sense of calm and presence she had found here once she returned to the noise and demands of city life. When you come to visit, she said, I'll show you my favorite peaceful spots in the city. The botanical garden, the old bookstore on Maple Street, the cafe by the river. I'd like that, Bruno replied. And you'll come back here? Try and stop. Me, Isis said, attempting a lightness she didn't quite feel. The thought of leaving the next day felt like a physical ache in her chest. They stayed up far too late, neither wanting to waste a moment of their remaining time together in sleep. When exhaustion finally claimed them, they fell asleep on the couch, still wrapped in each other's arms. Morning came too soon, bringing with it the harsh reality of departure. Isis had already packed her suitcase the day before, leaving it at the inn. All that remained was the drive to the airport, a journey neither of them wanted to make. Bruno was quiet as he loaded her carry-on bag into his truck. His face had the closed, guarded expression she hadn't seen since they first met, a mask to hide his emotions. "Talk to me," Isis pleaded as they drove down the mountain road. "Don't shut down now." Bruno glanced at her, his grip tight on the steering wheel. "I don't know what to say. I hate goodbyes." "Then don't say goodbye," Isis suggested. "Say see you soon. Because you will see me soon." He nodded, but the tension didn't leave his shoulders. 3 weeks, he confirmed. "I'll come to the city in 3 weeks. And I'll come back here for Thanksgiving," Isis added. "If that's okay." "Of course it's okay," Bruno said, his voice softening slightly. "My door is always open for you, Isis. Always." The drive to the airport felt both too long and too short. They tried to keep the conversation light, making plans for his visit, but the approaching separation hung over them like a storm cloud. At the airport drop-off lane, Bruno parked and helped her with her bags. They stood awkwardly on the curb, surrounded by other travelers rushing past. "So," Isis said, trying to smile, "this is it." "For now," Bruno corrected, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Just for now." Isis clung to him, memorizing the feel of his arms around her, the scent of pine and earth that always surrounded him, the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. When they broke apart, she saw that his eyes were suspiciously bright. "I'm not good at this," he admitted roughly, "at letting go of what matters." "You're not letting go," Isis assured him, touching the wooden pendant at her throat. "Neither of us is. We're just stretching the connection a bit." Bruno bent and kissed her, a desperate, hungry kiss that spoke volumes about his feelings. When they finally separated, both were breathing hard. 3 weeks, he reminded her, "and we'll talk every day." "Every day," Isis agreed. "I'll drive up to the ridge behind Martha's, where the cell reception is better." The airport loudspeaker announced final boarding for her flight, breaking the moment. Isis gathered her courage and picked up her carry-on. "See you soon, Bruno Reed," she said firmly. He touched her cheek one last time. "See you soon, Isis Matthews." Watching her walk into the terminal was one of the hardest things Bruno had ever done. Every step she took seemed to physically pull at his heart. He waited until she had disappeared from view before returning to his truck. As Isis settled into her seat on the plane, she touched the wooden bee pendant, drawing comfort from its smooth surface. 3 weeks suddenly seemed like an eternity, but they would make it work. They had to. What they had found was too precious to lose. The plane lifted off, carrying her away from the mountains, away from Bruno, back to the life she had temporarily left behind. As the landscape below grew smaller, Isis closed her eyes and made a silent promise to hold on to the peace she had found, to remember what really mattered, and to return to the man who had shown her a different way to live. The city skyline came into view as Isis's plane began its descent. Familiar buildings gleamed in the afternoon sun, a stark contrast to the mountains she had left behind. For a moment, she felt a surge of anxiety, her old life rushing back to meet her. "Breathe," she whispered to herself, touching the wooden bee pendant at her throat. "Just breathe." Her apartment felt strangely unfamiliar when she unlocked the door. Too sleek, too perfect, too silent. She set her suitcase down and walked through the rooms, noticing details as if seeing them for the first time. The expensive furniture chosen to impress rather than comfort. The bare walls painted a fashionable grey. The kitchen with its high end. Appliances that she rarely used. It was a beautiful space, the kind featured in design magazines. But standing there after 3 weeks at Pine Ridge Inn and Bruno's cabin, Isis realized something was missing. It didn't feel like home. Her phone, which she had charged at the airport, buzzed with notifications. Dozens of emails, text messages, social media alerts, the digital world reclaiming her attention. One text stood out from the rest, sent just minutes ago. "Let me know when you're home safe. Missing you already." Isis smiled, her anxiety easing at Bruno's simple message. She quickly replied, "Just walked in the door. Missing you too. Call you tonight when I get to the ridge." Unpacking could wait. She needed to check in with her. "Boss," Margaret answered on the first ring. "Isis, you're back. How was your, what did you call it, digital detox?" "It was good," Isis replied, surprised at how inadequate the word felt. "Really good, actually. Well, we've missed you here. The Richardson account is waiting for your magic touch. Can you come in tomorrow for a catch-up meeting, say 9 o'clock? Tomorrow, Sunday. Her vacation officially ended on Monday, but of course Margaret would expect her to come in early. The old Isis would have agreed without hesitation, eager to prove her dedication. "Actually, I need tomorrow to get settled," she heard herself saying. "I'll be in first thing Monday morning." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, well, I suppose that's fine. Just be prepared for a full schedule on Monday. Lots to catch up on." "I will be," Isis promised, feeling a small thrill at having set a boundary. It was a tiny step, but meaningful. After hanging up, she checked her fridge, empty except for condiments and a container of yogurt well past its expiration date. She would need to grocery shop, but first, a shower and a change of clothes. As the water washed over her, Isis closed her eyes and imagined she was back at Bruno's cabin, using his handmade soap that smelled of pine and herbs. The memory was so vivid, she could almost feel his presence. 3 weeks. She just had to get through 3 weeks until he visited. They could make it work. Her friend Maya called that evening, insisting on taking Isis to dinner to hear all about her wilderness adventure. They met at an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind with minimalist decor and tiny portions arranged like art on oversized plates. "You look different," Maya observed, studying Isis across the table. "More relaxed, and is that a tan?" Isis laughed. "I spent most of my time outdoors, and yes, I'm definitely more relaxed." "So the digital detox worked?" Maya sipped her martini. "No more panic attacks." "I haven't had a single one since I left," Isis confirmed, though the real test will be going back to work on Monday. As they ate, Maya peppered her with questions about the inn, the small town, the activities available in the middle of nowhere. Isis answered diplomatically, not mentioning Bruno until Maya noticed the wooden pendant. "That's new," she said, pointing to the bee carving. "Doesn't look like your usual style." Isis touched it instinctively. It was a gift. Maya's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "A gift? From whom?" There was no avoiding it now. "His name is Bruno. He owns a farm near the inn where I stayed." "A farmer?" Maya looked both shocked and amused. "You met a farmer?" The way she said the word made it sound like an exotic species. Isis felt a surge of defensiveness. "He's not just a farmer," she replied evenly. "He raises bees, makes incredible furniture, knows more about plants than anyone I've ever met. He used to run a successful hotel chain before choosing a different life." Maya's expression shifted from amusement to interest. "Wait, he left a corporate job to become a farmer. That's actually kind of fascinating, and clearly he made an impression on you." Isis smiled, relieved that her friend wasn't being judgmental. "He did. He's different from anyone I've ever met, more genuine, more present, and presumably not hard on the eyes given that smile on your face," Maya teased. "He's visiting in 3 weeks," Isis admitted. "I'd like you to meet him." Maya raised her glass in a toast. "I look forward to meeting the man who put that glow in your cheeks, though I have to say, I never imagined you with a mountain man." Neither had Isis, but then she had never imagined the peace she'd found in Bruno's world either. Later that night, Isis drove to the ridge outside town, where Martha had told her cell reception was reliable. The spot was nothing special, just a small clearing by the side of a winding mountain road. But it would be her lifeline to Bruno for the next 3 weeks. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting by the phone. "Isis," he said. her name like a sigh of relief on his lips. "How was your first day back?" "Strange," she admitted, leaning against her car as she looked up at the night sky. The stars were dimmer here, obscured by the city lights in the distance. "Everything seems the same, but I feel different." "Different how?" he asked. "Like I'm seeing my life through new eyes, noticing things I never questioned before." They talked for almost an hour, Bruno telling her about his day, a broken fence that needed repair, a new batch of honey ready for harvest, and Isis sharing her dinner with Maya, her conversation with her boss. "I actually said no to coming in on a Sunday," she told him, still surprised at herself. "The old me would never have done that." "I'm proud of you," Bruno said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Setting boundaries is important. When they finally said goodnight, Isis felt both better and worse, comforted by his voice, but aching for his presence. 3 weeks suddenly seemed like an eternity. Monday morning arrived with the familiar rush of alarm clock, coffee, hurried breakfast, and the search for the right outfit to project confidence and competence. Isis chose a navy blue suit she had always considered lucky, touching the wooden bee pendant for extra strength before tucking it beneath her blouse. The office was exactly as she had left it. Bright fluorescent lights, the hum of computers, the smell of industrial carpet and strong coffee. Colleagues welcomed her back with questions about her vacation that they didn't really want detailed answers to. Margaret beckoned her into a conference room almost immediately. "Welcome back. Hope you're rested and ready to dive in. The Richardson team is coming in tomorrow and we need a knockout presentation." For the next 8 hours, Isis was immersed in the familiar frenzy of marketing strategy, client expectations, and office politics. It was like slipping on an old pair of shoes, comfortable in their familiarity, but somehow no longer the right fit. By late afternoon, she felt the first stirrings of anxiety, the tightness in her chest, the quickening heartbeat. But instead of pushing through as she would have done before, she remembered Bruno's words about listening to her body. "I need to take a quick break," she told her team. "Just 15 minutes to clear my head." Outside, she found a small courtyard between office buildings. It wasn't exactly natural. The plants were in decorative containers, the trees carefully pruned, but it was quieter than inside. Isis sat on a bench, closed her eyes, and focused on her breathing. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8, just like her therapist had taught her. But now she added something else, a mental image of Bruno's farm, the mountains beyond, the peace she had found there. When she returned to the office, the tightness in her chest had eased. She could do this, one day at a time. That evening, exhausted, but proud of herself for managing the day without a full-blown panic attack, she drove to the ridge again to call Bruno. "You made it through day 1, he said when she told him about her small victory in the courtyard. "That's huge, Isis." "It felt different," she admitted. "Before, I would have ignored the warning signs until I crashed. Today, I listened to what my body was telling me." "That's what I mean about strength," Bruno said. "Real strength isn't pushing through until you break. It's knowing when to pause." His words warmed her, reinforcing the lessons she was slowly learning. They talked about his day too, a new foal born to one of his neighbor's mares, progress on a bookshelf he was making for Martha. "I contacted that gallery owner," he added casually, "the one who wanted to sell my bowls." "You did?" Isis was surprised and pleased. "What did she say?" "She wants to feature my work in an exhibition next month. Just a small display, nothing too fancy." "Bruno, that's wonderful," Isis exclaimed. "I'm so proud of you for taking that step." "It was your idea," he reminded her, "and you were right. I can share my work without letting it take over my life." Their nightly calls became the anchor of Isis's days. No matter how stressful work became, and with the Richardson account in full swing, it was plenty stressful, she knew that at the end of the day, Bruno's voice would be waiting. The second week was harder than the first. The initial adrenaline of returning had worn off, and the reality of her daily grind settled in. Meetings blurred together, deadlines loomed, and colleagues' dramas that once seemed so important now felt petty and exhausting. On Wednesday night, Isis caught herself, checking flight prices to Oakwood Valley, the closest airport to Bruno's farm. It would be so easy to just go back, to leave this pressure behind. But she knew that wasn't the answer. Running away wouldn't solve anything. She needed to find a way to bring the peace she had discovered with Bruno into her everyday life here. The next day she made a decision. Instead of eating lunch at her desk as usual, she walked to a small park 3 blocks from the office. Sitting on a bench with her sandwich, she watched squirrels chase each other around a maple tree, their antics making her smile. It was a tiny thing, but it helped. Each day after that, she found a way to incorporate a small piece of what she had learned from Bruno into her routine, taking time to really taste her morning coffee instead of gulping it down, buying fresh flowers for her apartment, standing on her balcony for 5 minutes each morning just to feel the air on her face. The weekend before Bruno's visit, Isis cleaned her apartment thoroughly and went shopping for real food. Not just the takeout and microwave meals she usually relied on, but fresh ingredients to cook actual meals. She wanted to share that part of herself with Bruno, to show him she was trying to create more balance in her life. On Sunday evening, her phone rang as she was preparing for bed. It was Bruno, his voice tight with tension. "Isis, I need to tell you something," he began, and her heart sank. Bad news always started that way. "What's wrong?" she asked, sitting on the edge of her bed. "The foal I told you about. The one my neighbor's mare had. It's sick, really sick. The vet's been out twice, but the little guy isn't improving." "I'm so sorry," Isis said, knowing how much Bruno cared about all the animals in his community. Not just his own. "Tom, that's my neighbor. He's at his wit's end. His family is devastated. That foal represents their livelihood for next year." Bruno paused. "I've offered to stay with the foal overnight, monitor his condition, give medication on schedule. But that means you can't come this weekend," Isis finished for him, disappointment washing over her. "I'm sorry," Bruno said, and she could hear the genuine regret in his voice. "I wouldn't cancel if it wasn't important. I can come the following weekend instead." Isis swallowed back tears. Another week of waiting seemed unbearable, but she understood. This was who Bruno was, someone who put others' needs above his own. Convenience. "Of course you have to stay," she assured him. "That family needs you, the foal needs you." "I've been looking forward to seeing you so much," Bruno said softly, "to showing me your world." "It's just one more week," Isis said, trying to sound more positive than she felt. "We can handle that." After they hung up, Isis let the tears come. It wasn't just disappointment. It was the strain of the past 2 weeks, trying to balance her old life with her new insights, missing Bruno with an intensity that surprised her. Then an idea struck her. If Bruno couldn't come to her this weekend, why couldn't she go to him? Her hands trembling with sudden excitement, Isis opened her laptop and checked flight availability. There was a seat available on Friday evening to Oakwood Valley. She could surprise Bruno, be there to help with the sick foal, spend the weekend at the farm instead of in the city. Without giving herself time to overthink it, she booked the flight. Friday couldn't come fast enough. Isis threw herself into the Richardson project, staying late each night to ensure everything would be ready before she left. Her boss noticed her renewed energy and focus. "Whatever you did on that vacation, it worked," Margaret commented. "I haven't seen you this sharp in months." If only she knew, Isis thought with a secret smile. The plan was coming together perfectly. Martha, sworn to secrecy, had arranged for a rental car to be waiting at the airport. Isis would drive straight to Bruno's farm, arriving around 10 p.m., if all went smoothly. Thursday night, she packed a small suitcase and set her out-of-office email response for Friday. Everything was ready, but life had other plans. Friday morning, the client called an emergency meeting. The CEO of Richardson Enterprises was flying in that afternoon and wanted to review the campaign personally before giving final approval. "We need you there, Isis," Margaret insisted. "You're the creative lead on this project. No one can present it like you can." Isis felt her carefully constructed plan crumbling. "What time is the meeting?" 4 o'clock. Shouldn't last more than a couple of hours. Her flight was at 7. It might be possible to make it, but it would be tight, too tight for comfort. "I have plans tonight," Isis began. "Important plans." Margaret's expression hardened slightly. "This is a multi-million-dollar account, Isis. I'm sure your plans can wait." The old Isis would have agreed immediately, putting work before her personal life without question. But she wasn't that person anymore. "I'm sorry, but they can't," she said firmly. "I can present up until 5:30, but then I have to leave for a flight." Margaret stared at her, clearly unused to such resistance. "A flight? Where are you going?" "To see someone very important to me," Isis replied, fingering the wooden bee pendant beneath her blouse. Something in her expression must have conveyed the significance of her plans, because Margaret's stance softened. "Slightly. Fine, we'll make it work, but I need you fully focused while you're there." "I always am," Isis assured her. The meeting was tense, the CEO more critical than they had anticipated. Isis presented the campaign with her usual professionalism, answering questions and addressing concerns while keeping one eye on the clock. At 5:25, she stood up. "I'm sorry, but I have to leave for a flight. My colleague Michael can address any further questions." The CEO frowned. "We're not finished here." Margaret jumped in smoothly. "Isis has a personal emergency, sir. Michael is fully briefed on all aspects of the campaign." Isis shot her boss a grateful look before slipping out of the conference room. She had just enough time to grab her suitcase from under her desk and catch a taxi to the airport. Traffic was heavier than usual, and by the time she reached the terminal, she was cutting it dangerously close. Running through the airport, she prayed she wouldn't miss the flight. This surprise, for Bruno, meant everything to her. She made it to the gate just as they were preparing to close the doors. Breathless but triumphant, she boarded the plane, her heart racing with excitement. The flight to Oakwood Valley was bumpy, the small regional plane buffeted by strong winds. By the time they landed, Isis was more than ready to be on solid ground again. The rental car was waiting as Martha had promised. Isis programmed Bruno's address into the GPS and set off, driving carefully on the unfamiliar mountain roads in the dark. It was nearly 10:30 p.m. when she turned down the long driveway to Bruno's farm. Lights were on in the cabin, and she could see his truck parked outside. Her pulse quickened at the thought of surprising him. As she pulled up and cut the engine, the cabin door opened. Bruno stepped onto the porch, squinting into the darkness, clearly trying to identify the unexpected visitor. Isis stepped out of the car, and in the spill of light from the open door, she saw his expression transform from confusion to disbelief to joy. "Isis," he called, as if not quite trusting his eyes. "Surprise," she called back, suddenly feeling shy despite the hours of anticipation. Bruno was down the porch steps in an instant, crossing the yard in long strides. Before she could say another word, he had swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet, in a crushing embrace. "What are you doing here?" he asked when he finally set her down, his hands still gripping her shoulders as if afraid she might disappear. "I thought if you couldn't come to me, I'd come to you," she explained, suddenly worried she had made a mistake. "I hope that's okay. I didn't want to wait another week." Bruno's answer was to kiss her, a kiss that melted away the stress of the day, the weeks of separation, all the doubts and fears. When they broke apart, both were breathless. "It's more than okay," he assured her, taking her bag from the car. "It's the best surprise I've ever had." Inside the cabin, the familiar scents of wood smoke and herbs welcomed Isis like an old friend. Everything was exactly as she remembered. The comfortable furniture, the bookshelves, the faint smell of pine. It felt like coming home. "How's the foal?" she asked, remembering the reason for their changed plans. "Better," Bruno reported, his face lighting up. "Much better. The medication finally started working yesterday. He's not out of the woods yet, but the vet is optimistic." "I'm so glad," Isis said sincerely. "I know how worried you were." Bruno studied her face in the warm light of the cabin. "You look tired." "Rough day," Isis laughed. "You could say that. Emergency client meeting, mad dash to the airport, bumpy flight. But worth every minute to see your face when I got out of the car. Are you hungry?" "I can make something," Bruno offered. "I'm fine," she assured him. "Just happy to be here." They sat together on the couch, Bruno's arm around her shoulders, catching up on the details of their days that hadn't made it into their nightly phone calls. The comfort of his presence, the easy conversation, the way he really listened when she spoke. All of it reminded Isis why she had fallen for this man so quickly. "Oh, I almost forgot," Bruno said suddenly, getting up to retrieve something from a drawer. "I made something for you. It was supposed to be a surprise when I visited, but since you're here—" He handed her a small wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of wildflowers. Isis opened it carefully to find a pair of earrings inside, small wooden discs with tiny bees painted on them. "Bruno, they're beautiful," she breathed, taking them out to examine the delicate craftsmanship. "To match your necklace," he explained, looking pleased at her reaction. "I noticed you don't have pierced ears last time, so I made clip-ons." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched Isis deeply. In her world, presents were often expensive but impersonal. Gift cards, designer items, things bought rather than made. Bruno had created these with his own hands, thinking of her every step of the way. She put them on immediately, the lightweight wood comfortable against her skin. "How do they look?" "Perfect," Bruno said softly. "Like they were made for you." Because they were. That night, Isis slept in Bruno's bed, his arms around her, their bodies fitting together as if they had been designed that way. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The sounds of the forest that had once frightened her now felt like a lullaby. The weekend passed in a blur of simple pleasures. They visited the recovering foal, a spindly-legged creature with big eyes that lit up when he saw Bruno. They rode horses along familiar trails, Isis much more confident on Daisy's back this time. They cooked meals together, read books by the fire, and talked for hours about everything and nothing. On Saturday night, Bruno built a bonfire in the clearing behind the cabin. They sat wrapped in blankets, watching the flames dance against the night sky. "I love it here," Isis said quietly, leaning her head on Bruno's shoulder. "I love the peace, the connection to nature, the sense of community. Most of all, I love seeing you in your element." Bruno was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. Finally, he turned to face her. "Isis, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." Her heart skipped a beat at his serious tone. "Of course, these past 2 weeks being apart but talking every day, has it changed how you feel about us, about what you want?" Isis considered the question carefully. "It's made me more certain, not less. Being back in the city, I kept looking for pieces of what I found here. Moments of peace, real connections, beauty in simple things. Sometimes I found them, but it was always a struggle, always something I had to consciously create in an environment that works against it." She took his hands. In hers. "I love my job, the creative parts of it anyway. I love some aspects of city life, but I've been happier these 2 days back here than I was in 2 weeks there. And a huge part of that is you, Bruno." Hope flickered in his green eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want to do long distance forever," Isis replied. "I'm saying I want to find a way to be where you are, where I feel most alive and at peace." Bruno's expression was a mixture of joy and caution. "Isis, I would never ask you to give up your career. I know how important it is to you." "I'm not giving it up," she clarified. "I'm considering a change. While I was back, I spoke with my friend, Maya, who works for a digital marketing agency. They have positions that are fully remote. I could work from anywhere with a decent internet connection." "You do that?" Bruno asked, clearly stunned. "Move here, change jobs, change your whole life." "For the right reasons, yes," Isis said firmly. "Not just for you, though you're a very compelling reason. For myself, too. For the woman I've discovered I can be here. Calmer, healthier, more present." Bruno pulled her close, his arms strong around her. "I want you to be sure," he whispered, against her hair. "I don't want you to wake up 6 months from now full of regret or resentment. I won't promise there won't be challenges," Isis said honestly. "There will be days I miss the city, my friends, the energy of my old life. But I've spent the past 2 weeks really thinking about this, Bruno. I've weighed what I'd be giving up against what I'd be gaining." She touched his face gently. "The panic attacks, the constant anxiety, the feeling that I was always running but never arriving anywhere. I don't want to live that way anymore. Here, with you, I feel like I can breathe." Bruno's eyes shone in the firelight. "I love you, Isis Matthews. More than I thought possible after such a short time." "I love you too," she replied, the words coming easily, naturally, enough to take a chance on a new life. They sealed their declaration with a kiss that held both passion and promise. When they broke apart, Bruno rested his forehead against hers. "We'll need to figure out a lot of details," he said practically. "Where you'll live at first, how to get decent internet out here, visits back to the city to maintain your connections there." Isis smiled at his methodical approach. "We will, together." That night, as they lay in bed planning their future, Isis felt a certainty she had never experienced before. The path ahead wasn't clear or easy, but it was right. Sunday came too quickly, bringing with it the reality of Isis's return flight that evening. But this time the goodbye felt different, tinged with sadness but not desperation. They had a plan now, a shared vision for the future. As Bruno drove her to the airport, they passed the trailhead where Isis had gotten lost on her second day. At Pine Ridge Inn, the wrong turn that had led her to the right place. "We should put up a proper sign there," Isis commented. "So no one else gets lost," Bruno smiled. "I don't know. Getting lost worked out pretty well for you." "It did," she agreed, touching the wooden bee pendant that she hadn't taken off since he gave it to her. "The trail got me lost, but you found me." 3 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Isis stood on the porch of Pine Ridge Inn with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise over the mountains. Her last box of belongings had arrived from the city yesterday, officially completing her move. The transition hadn't been entirely smooth. Her parents were confused by her decision to leave a prestigious job for remote work from a rural backwater, as her father put it. Some friends couldn't understand why she would choose a quieter life over the excitement of the city, and the job change had meant a significant pay cut, forcing her to adjust her expectations and spending habits. But every challenge was worth it. Her panic attacks had stopped completely. She slept better, ate better, lived better. And most importantly, she and Bruno were building a life together, one day at a time with honesty and care. Martha emerged from the inn, joining Isis on the porch. "Beautiful morning," she observed. "Big day today." Isis nodded, her stomach fluttering, with nerves and excitement. Today she would meet Bruno's parents for the first time. They were coming for dinner at the cabin, a significant step, given the strained relationship Bruno had with them. "They're going to love you," Martha assured her, patting her arm. "How could they not?" "I hope so," Isis replied. "It's important to Bruno, even though he pretends it isn't." Martha smiled knowingly. "That boy has never been good at hiding his feelings. Speaking of which, he's coming up the drive now." Bruno's truck appeared around the bend, right on schedule to pick her up for breakfast. In these 3 months they had established a comfortable rhythm, mornings together at the farm, days spent on their separate work, Isis at her new remote marketing job, Bruno with his bees and woodworking, evenings reuniting to share their experiences. For now, Isis was still living at the inn, in a small cottage on the property that Martha rented to her at a discounted rate. She and Bruno had decided not to rush into living together, giving themselves time to adjust to the major changes already in motion. Bruno stepped out of the truck, his face lighting up when he saw her on the porch. That look still made Isis's heart skip a beat even after all these weeks. "Good morning, beautiful," he called, climbing the steps to join her. "Ready for breakfast?" "Starving," she replied, accepting his kiss. Martha made blueberry muffins. "Perfect. We'll need fuel for the hike." Their plan for the morning was to revisit the trail where they had first met, a symbolic journey before the potentially stressful dinner with his parents that evening. After a quick breakfast at the inn, they drove to the trailhead. Bruno had kept his promise about improving the markers. New wooden signs clearly pointed the way, making it much harder for hikers to get lost. "Though I'm kind of glad the old markers were so faded," Isis teased as they started up the path. "Otherwise we might never have met." Bruno took her hand as they walked. "I like to think we would have found each other somehow." The trail was beautiful in autumn, the trees ablaze with red and gold leaves. They hiked at a leisurely pace, stopping occasionally to admire particularly stunning views or interesting plants that Bruno pointed out. When they reached the spot where Isis had fallen that first day, Bruno paused. "This is where I found you." Isis looked around, recognizing the clearing. "I was so scared, and then you appeared on thunder, like some knight from a fairy tale." Bruno smiled at the comparison. "Not much of a knight, just a man who was in the right place at the right time." "The exact right place," Isis agreed, stepping closer to him. "The exact right time." Bruno's expression grew serious. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Timing, fate, whatever you want to call it. How unlikely it was that you would choose this particular place for your vacation, that you would take this specific trail, that I would be riding thunder at that exact moment." He took both her hands in his. "I'm not usually one for big gestures or speeches. You know that, but some things need to be said." Isis felt her heart begin to race as Bruno reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box similar to the one that had held her earrings, but this one was carved with bees instead of wildflowers. "Isis Matthews," he said softly, opening the box to reveal a ring, a simple band of polished wood inlaid with a small, sparkling stone. "You got lost in my woods, but you helped me find my way too. Will you marry me?" Tears sprang to Isis's eyes as she looked from the beautiful ring to the face of the man she loved. Strong, kind, real, in a way no one else had ever been for her. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Bruno Reed. I will absolutely marry you." His hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "I made the band from the same cherry wood as your necklace and earrings," he explained. "The stone is a diamond, but I kept it small and simple. I thought that suited us better than something flashy." "It's perfect," Isis assured him, admiring how the wood gleamed in the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. "Absolutely perfect." Bruno kissed her then, a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, a life balanced between his world and hers, between nature and civilization, between solitude and connection. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. "Now we really have something to tell your parents tonight," Isis observed. Bruno laughed. "They'll be surprised, but pleased, I think. They've been dropping hints about grandchildren since I told them about you." "One step at a time," Isis said, though the thought of children with Bruno, little boys and girls with his green eyes, learning about bees and horses and the wisdom of the forest, made her heart swell with joy. They continued their hike, eventually reaching the mountain overlook where Bruno had first taken her stargazing. Below them stretched the valley, the small town, the winding roads, and somewhere in the midst of it all, the path that had led her to him. "How do you feel?" Bruno asked, his arm around her waist as they gazed at the view. Isis considered the question, touching the wooden bee pendant at her throat, then the new ring on her finger. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from panic attacks in a corporate office to finding peace in the most unexpected place. From a woman who couldn't breathe to one who had learned to listen to her body and her heart. "I feel like I've come home," she said simply. "Not to a place, but to myself and to you." Bruno's arms tightened around her. "The trail got you lost," he quoted her earlier words. "But I found you." Isis turned in his embrace to face him, smiling, up at the man who had shown her a different way to live, to love, to be. "And I found you too, right where I was meant to be all along." Above them, the autumn sky stretched clear and blue, promising many more seasons to come. Winters by the fire, springs in the garden, summers among the bees, autumns on the mountain. A lifetime of simple moments adding up to something profound. A trail leading not away from the world, but toward what truly mattered, a trail to the heart. The end.